also value motorcycling and handball in certain countries. America obviously has its own form of football with NFL, as well as basketball and baseball. Nations in the southern hemisphere, particularly below the tropics in Africa and Oceania, they tend to be good at rugby union. And here in Asia, you can see sports like table tennis and badminton. Those racket sports attract the eyeballs and have a lot of success. Of course, everywhere has football, but it is in different stages of its development in all of those different locations. So what is the potential of the sports industry in Asia? How can organizations get the most out of this market? How does that differ to other parts of the world? And what learnings can be taken from specific sports that can benefit the sports industry here as a whole? Plenty to discuss then with our next panel in this session entitled The Asian Sports Industry. So please welcome on stage your moderator for this session, Helen Soulsby, who is the Managing Partner APAC for SRI, and your speakers, Luer, Chief Executive Officer Sports at Total Sports Asia, Sundar Raman, who is Chief Executive Officer Sports at Reliance Industries, also James White, Head of Sales APAC at FIBA Marketing, and Owen Lead, Commercial and Communications Director for the Badminton World Federation. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel. Helen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. We were expecting a bit more of an applause there, but we'll forgive you and thank you. Marcus has got some hecklers already. Okay, we're delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to have old friends and new on stage. When we were researching and planning this session, unfortunately, I was a bit concerned about this, actually found out that between us, we have more than 100 years of experience in the sports industry across Asia. So depressing or good, I don't know what that is. But we were very cognizant of the fact that it's a bunch of Westerners on the stage. But there is a lot of experience here. We're by no means expert, but there is some expertise. I think what we're going to start with is, originally this panel was about what can football learn from other sports? And that's really where we want to get to in the crux of the session. So if we start broadly, looking at the differences, similarities, challenges, but broadly across Asia, is it different? Or is it just that it's an emerging market? What do you see as different?
Thank you, Helen, and good morning. Owen Lead, Badminton World Federation Commercial Director. Asia for us clearly is different because we are one of the biggest sports here. 60% of our fans come out of China, Indonesia, and India, so it's a relatively easy conversation for us. I think fundamentally the learning perhaps for other federations is the strength that we have in our local in-country federations, especially in those three countries.
Sundar?
I think the challenge from an Indian perspective has always been having a pipeline for talent to come through. The support at a grassroots level has been not that great, and football in this part of the world certainly needs that. What cricket has shown over a period of time for it to become and continue to be the dominant sport in a market like India is demonstrative of the potential that sports has in the marketplace. But with lack of infrastructure at the levels that it is, the structured coaching and pathway that is sort of coming to terms at this point in time, it's not been in existence. And it's not ironic that India, football in India goes back to 1880s. We still run the third most oldest footballing tournament in the world. But somewhere along, we lost that way, and I believe some of the other sport has taken a lead, and it's time to wrest control from football standpoint, and it should happen sooner than later.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting point, and the panel will kill me for jumping around, but we did talk about in terms of participation and development and what are those light bulb moments that you really need to be able to build your sport across the region? I mean, what has cricket done that football has failed to do?
One, cricket is an advertiser-friendly sport. At the end of every over, you have a commercial interruption. Football doesn't allow for that. And in a market like India, which is less of subscription-driven, revenue-driven marketplace, it's a large advertising-driven marketplace. Football is not that conducive as a sport yet. So you have to rely on true fans coming through the pipeline to generate substantive value. What cricket has also done is it's sowed the seeds for development at a very, very early stage of development of the sport. And it has always been ahead of the curve. Whether it's in format, when the new T20 format came up, the IPL came in 2008, on the back of India's World Cup victory in 2007 to start the new wave. Before consumers could get bored of cricket or, seen as my father's sport or my grandfather's sport, it started to attract the younger audience far earlier. And that happens through television, through great marketing, and more importantly, showing a pathway for the kids. If I take up football today as a kid in India, what do I get to do when I grow up? Can I be a professional footballer and make a living? I think those economic challenges and lifestyle challenges have been a big question, which has been addressed very effectively with a sport like cricket. So they developed at a grassroots level, they marketed it well, and they showed a pathway that you can play the sport that you love and still make a more than decent living playing the sport.
And I mean, you work a little bit in basketball as well, Sundar, but James, you're looking after FIBA across the region. I mean, how are you improving that accessibility, that participation, and for people to see heroes? Because it's only really a very popular sport in China and the Philippines, and you've got a lot of markets.
Sure, I think the way that we are pushing our sport out is really on a marketing level of lifestyle. Basketball is probably one of the only sports that has elements of it in music, in fashion, as well as on the court. On court, off court, it provides us the ability to push to hardcore fans as well as 50-50 fans, even women. So when you go to a basketball game, even women, yeah, because obviously the male input in sports is much higher than in terms of interest, much higher than women. So going to a basketball game is really like going to an entertainment event. And as we push the lifestyle elements off court, wearing basketball clothing off court, listening to rap music, hip hop music, really basketball can live in a diosphere outside the events that we push as well. So we're pushing the lifestyle angle, and that helps us to reach out to a broader audience. And
I guess when we're talking fan first, as in the fan of the lifestyle, not just the sport, engagement across different and newer social media platforms and digital platforms is essential.
I mean, first of all, apologize for the eyeglasses here. I have an eye operation, but
just a rock star, Marcus.
No, I know. I of course, but on the in general, I think there are a couple of things. First of all, Asia is not a homogeneous location. So when we start talking about Asia, we all need to be very, very careful. What happens in India is very different than China and North Asia or Southeast Asia. So clearly, whatever we always say here, there's always an asterisk and probably always an exception to the rule already. I think that's always important to state maybe up front. We as a company have been involved for 20 years in this region, doing different things. And what I've seen over 20 years and how the industry developed is, and that's maybe part of what we're talking about here, is that there is a much deeper focus now on local sports. And Reliance does a huge amount of that in India, really pushing the envelope out. I think yesterday I had a conversation with someone where we debated over, if you can imagine the amount of money which was spent on international football rights, if that money would have been in Asia into the local leagues, where could these leagues been? Right? The billions of dollars which gone to the Premier League and others. So that's an interesting thing to think about, right? So I think that's the challenge, and I think some speaker earlier said it as well. How do we keep that money here? How do we keep the money in the sport, which we all want to promote and grow? Build ecosystem, build the careers, and many things Reliance and others are doing. So that is the challenge for all of us. It doesn't matter what sport.
And when we talk about the fact that Asia is not homogenous, I mean, everyone knows that, right? We don't want to teach everyone to suck eggs, but across this panel, I mean, we've got people that have worked in Japan, Korea, Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, I could go on, and mainland China and India, subcontinent. I think it would be really interesting to know some of the key differences in those markets and how you're adapting to them or attacking them, I guess.
Yeah, you really, in the first place, it's everything is local, right? I mean, yes, we are as a company operate regionally, but then every approach we do is very local. So when we go in the country, we of course look at what is the products, what makes sense, where do we
Where can we add value? What is the number one or two sport? For us, football is now becoming much more important than it maybe used to be in the past. So football is just about everywhere outside of India and a few other pockets, the number one sport in the region. So since we are at a football conference, that's the good news for the football world out here. There are very few markets where you're not number one. But football, again, is not just the local football, right? You have the international element too. You have all the other parts to it. Why does Malaysia spend so much more money on the Premier League, or why does the World Cup receive a lot more money than the local leagues? And on the back of it, it doesn't have the right support. It drives me crazy. But that's part of where we're here and trying to change.
James, you've done a lot of work in Indonesia, particularly in other markets. What are you seeing?
Well, from a FIBA perspective, obviously we have a complex way of identifying which countries need certain support operationally, in terms of commercial support as well. Countries like China is our number one participation country in the world for basketball, so they need less support than a country like Myanmar, obviously. So our focus is really on helping those countries that need more support from headquarters to generate more interest, to provide more infrastructure support, more organizational support, whereas countries like Japan, Korea, Philippines, Singapore, they're able to manage things more on their own, and we provide sort of a platform for them to excel and a platform for their players to move up the chain from the local league to the national team to the regional tournaments to the World Cup. And for us, that is the focus, is to provide that chain of advancement, to give players and athletes and individuals, from whether it's 3-on-3 or 5-on-5, the opportunity to move forward and advance and to see the next step on that chain. So from us, from our standpoint, we really focus more on providing more input to the countries that need it, but also providing that support to those countries that are advanced.
Yeah, just to ride on what I said earlier, for us it's fundamentally, we have in-country federations in 193 countries. So you can imagine that there are vast differences from the countries in which the sport is not so great to where the sport is huge, such as China. The Chinese Badminton Association focuses very much on the development of the elite level of the sport, where we work through them to the even more regional and local federations in cities and regions of the country. And that chain, that ripple effect all the way down and back up is very important to develop the sport. In India, we saw, and this is star power, the result of PV Sindhu in 2016 winning a silver medal at the Olympics grew our fan base by 100 million people in 2 years. So it's also the power that is generated through the stardom that clearly in football everybody recognizes. That's where we work very hard.
But you can get blips, right? So, I mean, particularly, for example, with basketball, Yao Ming, and everything went crazy, and we work closely with Major League Baseball, for example, and they've been working for 15, 20 years across North Asia to try and find their next great hope from China. So how, what strategies do sports have to put in place to ensure there's a sustainability and it's not just going to be popular when someone wins the World Championship? Is it possible? Do you have to have those heroes?
I think the example of Yao Ming in Chinese basketball has shown, Yao Ming has been retired for many years now, although he's the president of the Chinese Basketball Association, but so he's still involved. But basketball has grown since Yao Ming has retired. So there was a player in the NCAA now from Japan. His name is Rui Hachimura. He's going to be a lottery pick in the NBA next year. Just watch the Japan market go. And as players come along, it gives the local national association an opportunity to create long-lasting programs. As the more fans get involved, that's how you can engage them. And I know Marcus will be talking about engagement as we move forward, how important that is in terms of retaining fans and growing the sport in general. But you can create those programs as you have those star players, as we do in football. Every year we see new Asian players moving into major clubs around the world, and that is when there are blips and upswings in the interest in football in those markets, and that allows the local association to capitalize on creating new activities and engagement, which is sustainable even after that player is gone.
Sundar, your experience in India?
If you look at the development of football in this part of the world, Asian market, including India, it's happened sort of serendipitously, in a manner of speaking, for Premier League to get the kind of value of rights that they're getting from this market. I don't think they ever planned to extract this value from an Asian market, it started to grow. They started to find fans in this market because the quality of play that they were putting out was fantastic. And between the Premier League, La Liga, Bundesliga, and what have you, everyone, at least in respect of India, are focusing on, or at least started to focus on saying, what can I get out of this market? The minute they started to look into the market, they realized they need to give something to the market to get out. You can't come and cream the market out, and those days are gone. Whether it's the leagues at the league level, or it is the club saying, you know, let me come and play a friendly and get a couple of $1 million a check cut off. That's not happening. What these clubs and the leagues have started to realize, particularly after establishing their offices in India, is they need to contribute something to the marketplace. They need to stay committed to developing football in that country so that they get the biggest gain. That's what started to happen in NBA, whether it's developing China, where they've been there for 30 years or so. In India, we work with the NBA for a lot of, almost a half a decade in trying to build the grassroots. NBA's approach is refreshing. It's refreshing to say that, listen, I'm not here to cream the market. I'm here, I'm staying, I'm committed. Football has started to move in that direction. There should be a day. You spoke about the blip. It is important. We all look forward to that one Indian. Is he the next Mo Salah coming in from India, going to play on for a Premier League club or a La Liga club? Football will erupt in India.
Okay, but I guess to be a devil's advocate here, is it really La Liga or Barcelona or Manchester United's responsibility to grow the participation game and develop the game of football in India? That should surely be the Indian Football Federation or the Indonesian Football Federation. And these clubs want fans and eyeballs and merchandise.
It isn't. Absolutely, you're right. But look at what's happening. Over the years, the rights value for each of these Premier Leagues from Europe has only decreased. It's dropped 30%, 40%, 20% in the last 3 rights period. It's not that their job is to develop football in a new country. Their job is to unearth the next talent, therefore invest in grassroots. Nobody is expecting a 16-year-old kid to start playing for the top division and top flight in a Premier League. But the opportunities that are given will improve the quality of play. Who stands to gain the most? Take, for example, the NBA model. If basketball grows around the world, the single largest beneficiary of that will be the NBA because they have the best quality play. And that's what will happen with football. At least in the foreseeable future, Asian markets are not going to be able to catch up with the European leagues, the top flight leagues, in terms of quality of play or the affordability of those players. It's not going to happen. The economics don't allow it. It is more so important for these leagues and the clubs to therefore invest in building their fan base by staying committed rather than saying, listen, it's the job of a federation. Of course, job of the federation, I would rather do it because I stand to gain the most. I think that's the approach that will help them.
And I've seen particularly, it used to be we'll have a regional head office and we'll service Asia. And then people understand that it's a bloody big space and a lot of different markets. So there is most definitely a move towards localization. Now that's difficult for a lot of sports because it's expensive and you can't have people in every single market. But often our clients will say, well, localization will translate the content. And that's not enough, right? So what does localization really mean for your sports?
It's adaptation more than anything else. I mean, the rules of our sport, badminton, are played the same all over the world. As I said earlier, we have the benefit of 193 in-country federations. And that's incredibly important. We have one BWF global office based in Kuala Lumpur, which we're very proud about. And we've just recently achieved a certain status with the government, which professes to the importance of the sport not only here but in the region. But it's the ability to ensure that not only you translate, but you have to adapt to your local region. Paraguay is very different to Bangladesh, is very different to the UK, for example. And you have to be on that through your local federations.
As with BWF, FIBA has 220 member nations with 5 global offices, and we, as federations, do have the luxury of having people in every market. So not a company, but as a federation, we have people literally on the ground in every market, and we listen to them all, and they tell us what basketball is like in their market. As Owen said, there are very, very different elements. We provide the platform, we provide the rules, we provide certain best practices, but we need to listen to them in terms of how to generate more interest on the local level and what types of elements they can utilize, whether it's digital or traditional media or other promotional elements, because all markets are different. So we need to be flexible. We need to provide as many different platforms and support mechanisms as we can. But that is literally because we have people on the ground, boots on the ground in markets around the world.
No, if I had to dip into a cricket example again here. So cricket was very strong in India as a market for the last 8, 10, 12 years. Going back to the 83 World Cup, it started to grow. The interesting thing about cricket is, until recently, or 8, 10 years ago, cricket was a sport where the narrative was only in English. And 98% of Indian population, or the large cricket market, if you take India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, did not necessarily understand or follow that narrative, the commentary. It was more peers talking to each other. You talk of back of the length delivery, Yorkers, the guy sitting in the streets of Muzaffarnagar will not understand what you're talking about. Come at the change with the IPL and with the advent of more consumer-centric broadcast, cricket started to grow regionally, and it is, as he rightly said, it's adaptive. It's not transliteration. It's you went into regional languages, and the headroom for growth was so huge that suddenly, even in a large market like India, it started to grow. This year, the IPL is telecast on 24 channels in India in 8 languages, and that's giving them a reach of upwards of 500 million people. NBA started to do broadcast of NBA games in Hindi, and these are good steps. So Wimbledon is talking about telecast in a regional language in Hindi. So if you look at Asia, how many languages should sport be broadcast in? And are the federations and the leagues ready for it? You spoke of the regional offices that people reach out to you. Those are largely regional commercial offices. It is about what can I cream from here. These are not regional development offices, whether it is developing the sport or finding the next player or next talent, or developing the marketplace in terms of regional push. How many regional offices have actually gone back to their headquarters and say that, listen, I needed it in 23 languages in Asia? That's the day when sports will truly grow in my view.
Let me jump on that for a second and maybe take this another level. One of the things we've invested in a few years ago, over the last few years, is an OTT platform. And what we are building there is what Sundar was just talking about, that not just we provide these different languages, but the fan gets engaged. So we haven't really talked that deeply about how different is the fan out here, as well as what you can do with the fans. When you really go deep into this, you find there is a huge passion for many sports, not just for the international sports, on a local level. And they're looking for that voice. We worked with BWF in Indonesia, which obviously is an important badminton market. And we found half a dozen influencers in the market who can drive tens of thousands of viewerships because of their followers, because of the passion they have for the sport. Now, that's of course all in the local language. That's a no-brainer. But Indonesia doesn't have one local language. There is probably, 50 or 100 local languages, like regionally, like any part of the world. So what we're trying to build is something where the fan has the voice, where I can be a kid somewhere in Java, but I love badminton that much, and I maybe know enough about it, that I can be the next YouTube star on SportsFix. To me, that is the ultimate trick. How do I bring the fan now in this ecosystem? The part we've been cracking our head on for years is, how do we take the fan who's really always the last line of defense? The guy always ends up paying for everything. How do we bring him into the ecosystem, right? How do we not have him there just paying the bill to buy the jersey, to pay for the tickets to watch the event, or pay for the cable subscription? How do we bring him right in there and make him part of it? Now, in some scenarios, unfortunately, we are, and I use that carefully, destroying the current pretty ecosystem we have. So the valuation of TV rights, I would argue, for the next few years will be flat, if not going down, for most sports. I mean, again, very general comment, obviously. Why? Is because OTT is fighting with traditional platforms, and no one has figured out yet. It's lots of VC money in the game. And so, therefore, for a while, I believe the industry, we should all get used to that the fees do not go up. The creamy days we had there over the last maybe 20 years are somewhat over. But that doesn't mean that the fan is not there, that the fan is not willing to and wanting to engage even more and deeper. And that's the beauty, of course, of OTT. It allows them to go so much deeper in it rather than just sitting in front of the screen and someone talks to you. What's it's about? It's not, in my mind, it's not about the rights holder should translate it. Let the fan be the voice. They're much better at it anyway.
Generating their own content for you.
Absolutely. I mean, Marcus makes a very good point that we debate day in, day out in our commercial relationships. I had a nice discussion with CK from Astro this morning, who's certainly one of our biggest clients globally in a market that represents 3% of our fans in Malaysia. So that in itself is remarkable. But the concept of a prosumer, where the fan becomes a producer, the consumer becomes a producer of content, is exceptionally important, not just to badminton, but every other sport in the region and globally.
I think user-generated content is the way of the future, and I think if we're talking about future growth and where's every sport going, including football, I think user-generated content shows everyone that we can all be involved, as Marcus says. In the U.S., I think is one of the leaders in user-generated content across all the professional leagues. And literally every friend of mine has participated back home in some form of user-generated content. Now you can literally turn on an NFL game in America and listen to your favorite random guy do his own commentary to the game. And it could be some just dude sitting on his couch or a couple of guys, they're swearing or whatever the heck it is, whatever the accent that they have that you enjoy. And you're watching that with the content coming forth on the screen. And I think if I was in the traditional TV production game, I would be a bit scared because all the big fees of those TV production guys are also going to be hacked because most people really would rather listen to, not most, but all, a large percent would rather listen to people who reflect their interests more than some guy who sits up there very stiffly or whatever and commentates in a certain way. So I think across the board, user-generated content and technology, we need to embrace technology moving forward because that is the way of the future. That's where the kids are, the millennials. We need to reach out to that group in order to maintain our relevance.
Yeah, and it's an important point because I think the younger consumer or the people coming through aren't as bothered about the quality of production, They just want to be a part of it. They want to kind of own it in some way. We started quite a good discussion yesterday when we were planning about take a 25-year-old Asian consumer and compare them to a 25-year-old European or American. What is different? What do we need to be looking out for here?
I think Marcus had a good discussion.
Maybe
Very strong
I'll jump
points,
in first. I think, and again, we're using the example from Indonesia, but I do believe that there is some generalization in there. The young Asian consumer does not like to pay for things. They will first, for sure, find an illegal stream or any other forms of consuming the content. So, and we were just talking about earlier the model between SVOD versus AVOD, so advertising-driven subscription models or models versus a subscription model. Asia, I believe for now, and I think even DAZN in a market like Japan, which we would argue is as sophisticated as anything, has seen it. It's very, very difficult. So it is still the old advertising model to some degree. I always compare it to the terrestrial world, which the free-to-air world we all lived in, and how they made their money. And that's literally where we're getting back to. Now, the beauty of it is, of course, you used the word, data is oil. And that's, of course, the power, right? We now having huge, rich data, which we are gathering on our platforms, where the fan we can truly identify. Therefore, the message I'm sending to someone here on the panel would be very different based on their liking, based on their age, based on their demographics and everything in between, maybe based on their languages even. So that's the key to the puzzle. And the Asian consumer, for sure, for now at least, until either that habit changes, which it might never. I mean, I don't believe it isn't. It's not about that the consumer doesn't have the money. There is plenty of money in Asian markets, as we all know. So always saying, well, they're not as sophisticated, or there isn't the same amount of money as in America or Europe, etc. I think that's rubbish. What it to me is a lot more. There is a habit. They're not they didn't maybe grow up that way as where, okay, fine, there are certain things you pay for. For them, it's like, well, everything has always been for free. Why does it change?
I agree with you. I mean, this quote that often gets stated that Asian consumers aren't as sophisticated as Western consumers, it just drives me absolutely bonkers. It's maybe they're actually much smarter.
In many ways, far more sophisticated.
And that's exactly why we need to change. I think that's where we need to bring a completely different model to the consumer or to the market to generate revenue again. And that's what I said earlier. I think numbers will go down because right now we haven't figured it out yet.
And it does link to cultural differences, but also the stage of where they're at in terms of middle class spend or wherever we started to talk about that yesterday as well.
I think the larger trend that we all notice is entertainment, and certainly sport is one of that, is increasingly becoming individual centric. I think gone are the days of sitting in front of a television and watching it. You're consuming it on the go. You're consuming it on your mobile. You're consuming it on devices which are much smaller than on television. So the 10-inch screen or below is defining the consumption. The 25-year-old between Europe and Asia is mobile first. To me, that's a shift that we need to get acknowledged with. What it does is it will allow you to individually monetize, as Marcus spoke about data, customized feed. It will also allow you to be social while watching the content. So play along is an interesting feature that's coming up. The broadcasters and the federations need to recognize the fact that they need to start doing mobile first production. You're watching a football game. In a television screen, it is visible because it's reasonably big. In a mobile screen, that's a dot. So you need far closer shots, you need tighter shots, you don't need the long shots. So the thinking on content production also will need to evolve. And the play-along piece, the individual consumption, the data piece will all define the long tail of advertising monetization or long tail of subscription monetization. Gone are the days of the highest common multiple giving you the revenue. So if you're sitting in the UK, you're paying 100 quid to get the Sky bouquet of sports channels. In India, for 100 quid, you will get 600 channels for a year, including sports. And in some instances, you get to watch more English football in India than sitting in England for this price. So the long tail of advertising, a long tail of subscription will all start to evolve. When will sport get into programmatic buying or selling of advertising inventory or monetization? That's where the next wave of revenue will start to come in. Marcus is right about the fact that the sports rights at a sort of a 30,000 feet level may be static, except for a certain set of sports where it may go up or down marginally. But I think the revenue opportunity is sitting somewhere else, and I think that's where the advertising and the broadcasters' focus need to be.
And when we're talking about the modern Asia consumer wanting to, generate their own content and have their own commentary, we can't really have this discussion without raising esports. So how are your sports coping, dealing, or embracing with that?
It's an interesting one for us. We've been cracking our heads against esports for a good 2 years, where the first question that we have to ask ourselves in our responsibility as a federation whose mission is to put a racket into the hand of a child, how do we deal with esports? Do we develop a game? If we develop a game, will that result in a child playing the physical sport that we are charged to do, or how do we evolve to become?
And no one knows that.
And we
No
don't
one's
know
got
the
that
answer.
data.
There's not a single esports platform that has proven to me that a physical activity is undertaken as a result of that.
From our perspective, we look at gamification in a wider kind of sphere than just esports. If you look at fantasy sports and other types of games that you can play through your mobile phone, through the internet, we are going to be rolling out a lot of these at our World Cup in China this year. And the reason we're doing that is because the more you care, a lot of people care more about a game than they do about the actual game on the court. But if we link what's happening on the court to what's happening in your game, and because they care about their game, they're playing against their friends, or there's prizes that they could win, and they need to watch what's happening on court in order to be better at their game. So we're trying to link things happening actually in physical games, either that you have to do yourself or that you have to watch in our official competitions, back into games that we're producing. So that's kind of the way that we're engaging directly in games. And then I think in a general sense, we need to be reaching out to gamers in general just to make sure that we're relevant with them. And if we're offering great games like NBA 2K and actual basketball games that are being played by millions around the world, people, in order to be better at that game, also need to know who the actual real players are. So they are tuning into the games just to understand who they should pick to be on their teams. And therefore, there is that back and forth. And we realize that that guy may not ever go and shoot a basket, but he's going to engage in basketball by watching our content so that he can understand how to play his game better. So,
it goes back to fan first for you guys, yeah.
exactly, and that's all that matters for us.
Sorry, just a quickie. We urge all gamers, and I'm sure some of you may be gamers and you may have children who are gamers, to take up badminton. Because it's fantastic for hand-to-eye coordination, general fitness, and so on. That's my message around esports today. That might change
and do you have
tomorrow.
a research study from Copenhagen? You do, don't you?
Don't play badminton, play basketball. Basketball's a better sport than badminton. Well, why would you play
let's have
badminton?
a fight on stage.
Let's get in cricket too.
Play everything, we'll monetize them all.
I think the angle I would come from are two things. One is if I play FIFA or if I play the NBA games, that's great. That I'm naturally therefore in the sport, and therefore to take me from there to also watch and enjoy the real game or the real sport it would be fairly obvious. That's, I don't think, the challenge here, right? The challenge is the kids who play Dota and League of Legends and everything else, which will never ever have anything to do with sports for that matter. So, and I don't have to can't remember the last percentage, but I think it's about 80% of games I played in that genre, i.e., the sort of the fighting sports and fighting games, etc., versus, let's say, traditional sport games. So if you are a sport who has a great game, and basketball I think is one of them, clearly football has it, wrestling has it.
It translates.
It translates, easy peasy. But what do you do with all these others who never ever go there, right? And so I think that's the challenge. How do we bring that community in? How do we get them away from, yes, purely sitting in front of computers? I think that's, I don't know the answer there yet, but we're cracking it.
I think if you separate the esports, I presume you meant the larger gaming side of things. If you split it into the recreational side of it, the Angry Bird, Candy Crush style of gaming, where you're an passive participant as against the e-gaming, the esports piece. The esports piece is where the big bucks are, the serious contenders are, and that's 1.5 to 2 year gestation period for you to get. So the recreational side of gaming is like entertainment. The serious side of gaming is where the money is professionalism. You need to be good at it, and you're competing, you're owning a team. And the publishers in that, whether it's a Blizzard or Riot Games, have cracked the model so well that they control every aspect. They are the federation in that. NBA is trying to break away, trying to create the 2K League. FIFA has done a not so bad job in terms of trying to create the FIFA leagues and trying to have an annual competition in and around the FIFA World Cup and trying to get there. I think, is it adding substantively to the sport? Yes, it does. It keeps your interest alive, but that's the recreational side. I don't see professional sports merging with esports in the foreseeable future, because that's a pathway that is sort of running away. What the federations are now trying to do is catch up with the technology and the kids who are sort of falling out of the sports.
Yeah, I mean, there's already been a whole panel on esports, and you could have clearly on esports and gaming a whole conference, but we digress. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and the orchestra will start pretty soon to get us off stage. So let's just have a final comment in terms of, your crystal ball. What do you think the opportunity is, and how are you aiming to future-proof your sports to ensure you can continue to leverage this golden opportunity in Asia?
I think the answer for us currently, and it's a changing world, is quite simple. With the relative commercial successes that we've had from our days with TSA through IMG now into Infront, the vast majority of that money goes into grassroots development and the evolution of the sport and the ability to ensure that young children, we have a schools program in I think now 125 countries. I'm sure someone will slap me if I've got that wrong, but maybe 130. And this is a program to teach teachers to play badminton, teach teachers to teach kids to play badminton. Programs like that are essential and they're unavoidable. This is physical sport happening in schools all over the world.
From my perspective, and from FIBA's perspective, making the sport as fun as possible is going to allow you to reach out to as wide a community as you possibly can. So creating a fun element to the sport, and also creating multiple engagement points. As many ways to interact or to engage from a consumer standpoint. How can I engage with that sport? I can play it, I can watch it, I can game it, and it's easy. I think that is the way forward. Make it fun and make it easy to interact, and I think you'll be doing well in any sport.
Asia is pretty much the future, and I think that's been repeated ad nauseum. But the fact is, you will never have a sport globally successful if they don't have a reasonably large presence in Asia. Not just because of the largeness of the market, but surely because of the size of the population. And if sport relies on fans, you will have the biggest fan base here. I think the days of domination of Europe and the US and the Americas in sport will increasingly getting reduced with the talent that's coming through. And I think if we start focusing on developing talent pathways and actually, teaching them right, the large impetus needs to be in infrastructure, coaching, and talent development and identification. I think we have sports secure for long time to come.
Maybe just to wrap it up from my side, I would say the word or the key would be digital engagement. That's the beauty when we talk about digital engagements. The fans, the consumers here in Asia are very digital already, right? Southeast Asia has 800 million mobile devices for 600 million people. So there's not the problem that we don't have phones out here or people are already digitally on it. So that is, in my mind, it's the big equalizer going forward, where the leagues locally or in the region have an opportunity to potentially leapfrog much faster into the development than the Europeans or other leagues which have been there forever and been dominating. So to me, look at that digital engagement, figure out how you truly identify your fan and understand who they are, bring them into your ecosystem. Having 1 million fans or 100 million fans on Facebook means nothing to you. That's pocket money into Mr. Zuckerberg's pockets. You need to bring them into your ecosystem. That is the key to the puzzle. And the minute you can do it, doesn't matter what sport we're talking about here, obviously. The minute you have them in your ecosystem, that's when you can monetize them, right? Facebook, I believe, uses lifetime value of a user at $200 US. So 2 billion users, that's how you get $400 billion valuation. That's how you need to think. Think about what is the users, the fans you already have. They're built into our ecosystem, right? Fans are passionate, they're there. How do you really now bring them into your ecosystem? And then, some people don't like the word, but monetize them on the back of it. But by monetizing them because you know them, you know who they are. And if you can crack that formula, there is lots and lots of money out there, and it's the fan who wants to be there. And the fans will share that data with you.
Thank you. So obviously, building on the passion, I think you'll all agree I've got 4 pretty passionate guys within the sports industry here. So I know that they've got a lot more to say and share and discuss, and all are willing to speak to people after the session. So do grab them. But once again, thank you so much for joining me, Owen, James, Sundar, and Marcus.
Thank you, and thank you, Helen, as well, for steering that panel brilliantly. Well done, guys. Some really good themes that we're developing there. Thank you.